Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now I will discuss a new topic of the course Fuel Cell Fundamentals and Technology. This slide shows the course outlines. So in this video, I will discuss on the topic polarization curve and losses. Polarization curve. The EMF was approximately 1.2 volts for a low temperature fuel cell, that is 40 degrees centigrade, and about 1 volt for a high temperature fuel cell, that is 800 degrees Celsius. This voltage is never truly realized. Sometimes isn't is is it is not even reached when the open circuit voltage is measured, as figure 4.1 shows. In the next slide I will tell you. There are also some noticeable differences between the two. There are two figures in the next slides for low temperature fuel cell and high temperature fuel cell. First, the high temperature graph does not display any large initial voltage loss. It also does not have any initial rapid fall in the voltage in the 0 to 100 milliampere per centimeter square range. Uh, this is clear in this slide. This is the low temperature fuel cell. This is the graph which is showing the polarization curve for low temperature fuel cell. So for it here, the cell voltage is 1.2 volt, whereas for high temperature fuel cell, the cell voltage is 1 volt. And also it is described that in the start, there is no really loss in the start range, that is from 0 to 100 milliampere per centimeter square. Like in this current density range, like from here to here, there is no loss. 0 to 100 milliampere per centimeter square, there is no loss. Whereas in comparison to the polarization curve for low temperature fuel cell, in this range, that is from 0 to 100, there is appreciable loss in the voltage, right? So for low temperature fuel cell, losses 3 volt at open circuit and another 2 volt in the low current density range. Like in the start, it is uh, from here, I mean, um this is point 0.8, then it is 1, then it is 1.2. So there is a loss in this range, 0 to 100 milliampere per centimeter square. Then again, this curve is not a straight, so this is sloping. So again there is a loss in the voltage for low temperature fuel cell. So it is described here that high temperature graph does not display any large initial voltage loss. It also does not have any initial rapid fall in the voltage in the 0 to 100 milliampere per centimeter square range. In contrast, the low temperature fuel cell losses zero point 0.3 volt at open circuit and another zero point 0.2 volt in the low current density range. Like here is the low current density range, so there is a loss, right? So in the start from here, there is a zero point 0.3 volt loss start in the open circuit voltage, and then again there is a 2.2 voltage loss here in the low current density range. This is the low current density range, and next is the high current density range. Okay, so this is a big difference. And this slide shows the dependence of potential on temperature. So with the temperature increase in temperature, there is a decrease in the potential. So this is the reversible potential V, which is showing this is the straight line with the increase of potential, and this shows the chemical reaction going to take place in the fuel cell. So, polarization curve and losses. Now, I will discuss in detail. Although these two fuel cells act very different at low current densities, their graphs are very similar in character in the mid and high current density ranges. Both the low and high temperature fuel cells show a linear degradation until they reach high current density. At this point, both cells rapidly lose voltage with respect to increasing current density. This sudden fall in voltage occurs at about 900 milliampere per centimeter square in both the low and high temperature cells. Since the voltage of the cell is not seen as operating at the theoretically described EMF, we must now investigate the source of the losses in the system. We must modify the theoretical equation so that it models real life. Um, so, in this lecture, we will describe why there are voltage losses across the cathode and anode and how these losses can be minimized. There must be some new terms, and you must know about them. These important terms are over voltage or over potential and irreversibility. Over voltage or over potential, this is typically an electrochemist view of difference generated at the surface of an electrode. This voltage is superimposed over the ideal reversible voltage, but in the case of fuel cells, the over voltage actually reduces the reversible voltage. Another common term that can be used is irreversibility. This term has its origin in thermodynamics. The way in which this term is often applied is to heat loss in a Carnot cycle. But in a fuel cell system, due to chemical conversion of energy, the irreversibilities are extremely low. Irreversibility means losses, voltage losses in the fuel cell. Now, a general voltage loss description. Initial theoretical voltage E, that is equal to minus del GF over 2 GF over 2F. This equation we already have been derived in the last lecture. This voltage is not the operational voltage of the fuel cell, as figure 4.1 and figure 4.2 have shown us. Why the initial theoretical voltages are different? By applying equation 4.1 alone, we can see that the EMF of the fuel cell is directly dependent on the desired operational temperature. This is the case because we have seen in the last chapter that voltage is directly independent on the temperature. Figure 4.3 shows the application of the equation 4.1 to temperature in the 200 Kelvin to 1200 Kelvin range. In the last slides, we discuss about the dependence of the voltage upon temperature. So that figure 4.3 shows us why the low temperature fuel cell have a theoretical EMF of 1.2 volt and why the high temperature fuel cell have a theoretical EMF of 1 volt. Now, description of operational losses. The losses that were evident in figure 4.1 and figure 4.2 can be broken up into four different types of losses. Number one, activation losses, fuel crossover or internal current losses. Number three, ohmic losses. And number four, mass transport or concentration losses. These losses each have a different effect on the theoretical voltage of the fuel cell. So, first of all, activation losses. The activation loss occurs because the chemical process initially has not begun. Thus, activation energy is necessary in ensure that the reaction tends towards the formation of water and electricity as opposed to the reverse. This loss only occur at low current densities in low temperature fuel cell. Activation losses are a result of the energy required to initiate the reaction. This is a result of the catalyst. The better the catalyst, the less activation energy is required. Platinum forms an excellent catalyst. However, there is much research underway for better materials, I mean cheaper also. A limiting factor to power density available from a fuel cell is the speed at which the reaction can take place. The cathode reaction, the reduction of oxygen, is about 100 times slower than that of the reaction at the anode. Thus, It is the cathode reaction that limits power density. Now, the second loss, fuel crossover or the internal current loss. The second source of loss is the fuel crossover or the internal current loss. This loss is associated with the losses um, that occur through the electrolyte. It can occur in two ways: either the fuel leaking through the electrode, or fuel that crosses directly through the electrolyte from the anode to the cathode without releasing electrons through the external circuit, thereby decreasing the efficiency of the fuel cell. Or electrons leaking through the electrode. Fuel leakage causes most of the problems in this category, and just like the activation energy loss, this loss only has a significant effect at low temperatures. Now, the third loss, ohmic losses. Ohmic losses are a result of the combined resistances of the various components of the fuel cell. The includes the resistance of the electrode material, the resistance of the electrolyte membrane, and the resistance of the various interconnections. The most common source of loss in any electrical device is also present in the fuel cell, and those are ohmic losses. This type of loss occurs because of the resistance to the flow of electrons in the interconnect, the anode, and the cathode. This loss, like all ohmic losses, is directly proportional to the current. It appears as a major source of loss in both the low and high temperature fuel cells. This I can explain from the last figure, uh, like this. Here, this is the region where this slope is showing. This region shows the ohmic losses, region where voltage falls more slowly and graph is fairly linear. So this is showing the region for ohmic losses, right? And this in the start is the activation losses, right? This is the for low temperature fuel cell, as well as this slope shows the region for ohmic losses. Graph is mostly linear, and this graph is for high temperature fuel cell. So for both low temperature and high temperature fuel cell, this is the major loss that is occurring due to this ohmic losses. Now, next is the concentration losses, also referred as mass transport loss. The final type of loss is the mass transport or concentration loss. This loss occurs in both low and high temperature fuel cells, but is only prevalent at high current densities. It is the result of the effect of losing a high concentration of either fuel or oxygen at the anode and cathode, respectively. It essentially occurs because the fuel cell is using fuel or oxygen faster than it can be supplied. Like, supply is slower as compared to usage of the gases by the fuel cell. So it is essentially occurs because the fuel cell is using fuel or oxygen faster. Oxygen fuel cell is using at faster rate fuel as well as oxygen for the chemical reaction for the production of water, and their supply is lower or slower as compared to the chemical reaction that is going to take place in the fuel cell. All of these losses contribute in their own way to form the operational voltages that can be seen in fuel cells today. So concentration loss mean that the concentration of the fuel and the oxygen is going to be reduced. So supply of fuel and oxygen is less as compared to their utilization. These losses result from the reduction of the concentration of hydrogen and oxygen gases at the electrode. For example, following the reaction, new gases must be made immediately available at the catalyst sites. With the buildup of water at the cathode, particularly at high currents, catalyst sites can become clogged, restricting oxygen access. It is therefore important to remove this excess water, hence the term mass transport. So um, um, water accumulation or the water production must be, there is a need to remove that excess water from the fuel cell so that fuel cell can work properly. So this was all about the voltage losses and the polarization curve and the voltage losses. So uh, thank you very much for looking this slide.